And now we present to you Thac0 with Advantage.
Welcome to Thac0 with Advantage. We're two friends that have been playing D&D a long time. While we both love lots of other RPGs, D&D still encourages us to spend our currencies. Hi, I'm Ange, and I've been gaming for over 3 decades, started with 1st edition and haven't stopped yet. I've been writing for Gnome Stew for a decade now, and I run the Gnomecast, the Stews podcast.
I haven't written anything on Gnome Stew for a while, and I have my own blog that I am neglecting equally well. If you enjoy this show, it's the only reason to know who I am.
That is not true. You have some amazing reviews and amazing articles out there. They're just not, and I mean, dude, I haven't written for an article for Gnome Stew since last year, so don't give yourself a break.
So after we look at the games that we're running in the campaign journal, we'll be talking about metacurrencies. Then we'll have some recommendations of D&D related content for you to check out in our downtime research segment.
Now stand by for station identification. This is WDND the Role Player. Now we're going to McElroy McKinney and the Bardic College.
In 1977, David Hargrave created the Arduin series of RPG products, which were technically their own RPG, but also looked a lot like supplements to D&D. TSR didn't exactly like some of the wording that implied you could copy parts of that one existing, in quotes, RPG, so Hargrave removed the section that said to copy other RPGs and used whiteout on his remaining copies to get rid of any references to Dungeons & Dragons. Thankfully, Hargrave made sure to make it clear that Arduin was its own RPG and, by some accounts, made a combat system so complicated that people reverted to using the supplements of D&D all over again.
Let me just finish up this campaign journal.
Okay. Campaign journal, the finale for the Poison Kingdom game happened and it was amazing. There's a little bit of a backstory. One of our players' birthday was going to fall on exactly our game night, and he kind of wanted to do something a little special. He's got a relationship with a local independent Lego store that does events, and so since they were his friends and we are his friends, he suggested that we do an in-person event at the store. And yeah, sure, we could do that. And as we started working the logistics out of what game we were going to be playing, we realized that this was going to time up perfectly with the finale of the Poison Kingdom game. It was so cool. Big Lego store, lots of cool Lego all over the place. The poor GM ended up spending large amounts of her monies to walk away with 3 nice Lego sets, including the Horizon Zero Dawn tall deck. There was, of course, food, pizza, subs, and I had a special cake made for his birthday. And then we got down to the game, where they had made special minifigs, custom minifigs for each of our characters, with tails, no ears or anything like that, but still, each minifig was tailored to each character. And we even had a Lego-based battle map. It was green flats with little dots to, indicate where the squares were. And all of our adversaries were also Lego minifigs. The first battle was a delightful mix of skeletons and zombies from the Lego Minecraft series. In the game, we had arrived in the ruins of a city that was the source of the corruption. The city was Buffalo, by the way. And we had to fight through those zombies and skeletons before we could find the source of the corruption. In tracing that source, we found the undead king of the Cat Kingdom, who was the person who caused all of this tragedy and chaos and poison. We fought him and took him down surprisingly easy, but then the true source of the corruption appeared, the Rat King, a giant, demonic, corrupted rat who had all of these mutated minions that we fought. It was a pretty tough fight, because there was a lot of minions, and the Rat King was tough, and he kept animating his minions as they died. The fight had gone on for a bit, and I had the brilliant idea of how to deal with all of the undead. I was going to do a turn undead, and I had just reached 5th level, so I would have the, destroy undead if they were a certain CR or lower. Problem is that they weren't actually undead until he raised them, so I couldn't It was very frustrating because I thought it would be this brilliant idea. And the GM's like, no, that's not the situation. You'd only take out 2 of the minions, then he'd still have plenty of bodies to raise. And I'm like, okay, fine. And I flung a guiding bolt at the Rat King. And the GM turns to me and goes, what does it look like? And I'm like, what do you mean, what does it look like? What do you look like when you kill him? And I'm like, I'm sitting here bitching and moaning that I can't do the cool thing that I wanted to do, and then I do the cool thing I didn't expect I was going to do. Anyway, it was really cool. We took out the Rat King, and I was kind of embarrassed about being surly about not doing the thing I thought I was going to do. But it was pretty awesome. I got to bring home my special mini that they made for Balana, and they gave the Rat King to Les as the GM of the campaign. It was really cool. I did also get to run Tales of the Valiant. This was the second half of the Hollow adventure, and I immediately had a bit of an oh crap moment as I remembered that the rogue Malvern had stolen a journal from the old priest in the last session, and I had told him I would come up with some information for him, and I had completely forgotten about it. I quickly came up with some stuff and had him do a roll, and intelligence is not his forte, so he really couldn't get much out of the book, so he ended up grabbing Zartath, the kobold wizard, to take a look at the book and discuss it. And with his roll, they ended up getting some hints about the singing tree that had basically roused the Hollow Man into its service. The next morning, they split into 3 different groups to deal with things. Malvern and Grish, the human cousins, ended up helping the villagers prepare the charcoal pit that they were going to try and drive the Hollow Man into. Zartath and Nevrim, the wizard and warlock respectively, went with the villagers in 2 separate groups around the perimeter to find all of the wood wards and remove their burdock crowns. Finally, Turvin and Dahlia, the druid and ranger, went to see if they could try and find the location of the singing tree. That ended up being a little bit of a fun scene because instead of finding the tree, which it would have been way too early for them to find a tree, and the Hollow Man would have been there, which would have been really bad for them.
Yeah, splitting the party. That's bad sometimes.
Yeah, splitting the party. And I wasn't, I wasn't going to do that to them. Instead, they found Mother Mulvor, who in the book is just described as some hedge witch type in the woods. I made her an Arena, which is a hedgehog person. And it was a little bit of a fun scene because as they're written, Arenas can understand common, but it's hard for them to speak it. It was a little bit of back and forth trying to exchange information with them. And she essentially let them know that she could tell them where the tree was, but they can't go there yet. They need to deal with the Hollow Man first. And they're like, oh, okay, yeah, fine. Now, I ended up kind of pushing this session along a bit harder than I normally would because they're first level and they really, really want to level up.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want them to level until they had completed this adventure, which included dealing with the Hollow Man and then dealing with the singing tree.
Yeah.
On a normal night, I would have probably ended things after they dealt with the Hollow Man because it was close to 11 o'clock. We generally only go to midnight. But I asked them, I'm like, hey, you guys want to try and deal with the singing tree tonight? And they're like, yeah, let's do it. The fight with the Hollow Man was pretty interesting because it was appropriately epic. And they basically used the next victim as the bait to try and lure the Hollow Man towards the big bonfire in the charcoal pit. I ended up kind of tweaking it a little to make it feel appropriately epic because he's a CR5 monster.
Yeah.
The players aren't supposed to be able to take him down. Oh, come on. Have you met my players? I ended up having to give him a certain degree of regen. I made it probably oh no, he's healing some of that damage.
Mm-hmm.
He's still, he's still coming. It was only 10 points a round or so, but it was enough to keep him alive and make them understand, oh no, we need to burn him to ashes. We hurt him if we hit him with fire, but he still keeps going. So they had to drive him into the fire pit. And it was a pretty epic fight and battle and all of that. From there, Turvin the druid ended up picking up Harvester, the Hollow Man's scythe, which gave them kind of a homing beacon on the singing tree and some abilities to kind of get closer to it. And that ended up, the singing tree itself was a pretty easy cakewalk. But I am very lucky as a GM that all of my players made their con saves in fighting the giant centipedes because the giant centipedes, in addition to doing their bite damage, do 2d6 poison damage.
Yeah.
That could have been really, really bad. As it was, the Hollow Tree ended up possessing Malvern for a little bit, and like he ended up trying to stab his cousin, and he's like, "What the hell are you doing, man?" Anyway, they killed all of the centipedes. They took out the singing tree. It shriveled into this white husk and dropped a perfectly red apple that rolled along the floor. All the players were like, "Oh no, no, no! I'm not touching that." Malvern picked it up and took a bite because I'm like, "It smells delicious." The thing is, I've complained before that I ran into the problem with this group that nobody had persuasion as a proficient skill, and only 2 of the characters had a positive persuasion bonus. We ended up shuffling things around a little bit. Dahlia now has persuasion as a trained skill because it makes sense with her nobility background.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it was still just like, I really wanted the apple to go to one of the 2 characters that had charisma, but it says right in the way it's written up that the apple will rot if it's not eaten right away, that it can't be preserved, that it just tells you that its effect is permanent. So now Malvern has an 11 charisma.
I'm tolerable.
I'm tolerable. I'm still going to say all the wrong things.
It's really funny because when you said that, my party did the exact same thing. They saw the apple roll away from their... Oh, no. No. I'm not eating anything that came from that tree.
I think Chris has been jamming long... Chris is Malvern's player. I think he's been jamming long enough that he's like, oh, no, 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 this is going to be cool. Let's do this. As my final note, Cobalt Press just today, as far as I know, released their updated version of the old Margrave for Tales of the Valiant, and I have already purchased it. I have already looked at the PDF. The physical copy will be coming to me eventually because I am a book goblin at heart, and I will be adapting things to that. The only hiccup with that is I'd already been prepping for the next adventure, which is not in the new book because they're like, yeah, this part isn't as good, so let's skip it. And I'm just like, I don't know whether I keep it and still do something with it or skip. I have a couple of days to decide. So
when I pick that up, I will then have 3 different editions of that adventure because I have the Pathfinder version, I have the 5e version, and this will be the Tales of the Valiant version.
It does look like the Tales of the Valiant version has a lot more character options in it. It has a bunch of subclasses for druids and rangers, and one for, I think, every class. Well, it has subclasses for everyone except for fighters and paladins.
Mm-hmm.
So it's got a lot of nice character options, and it's got a much bigger expanded spell list than compared to the 5e version of it.
Ooh, does it still have the summon squirrel horde?
I didn't dig into it that much.
I'll have to check.
I have actually sent my players a list of the subclasses that are available because probably not after our next session because I want to do at least two adventures before they get 3rd level, but they are going to have to consider what they're doing for their subclasses very soon.
Well, in my case, I've run 2 games since the last time we recorded, and Ange was in both of them.
Mm-hmm.
We got another session of our Midgard campaign in, and it is basically 2014 rules with a few 2024 tweaks, mainly like, yeah, you can drink a potion as a bonus action because Baldur's Gate 3 did that, and I'm not going to keep arguing with people. And then our sort of monthly game, which is the Tales of the Valiant game set in the Thrones and Bones setting. In our Midgard game, we finished up our Sahuagin fight, and I was concerned about how it was unfolding for a bit, to the point to where I was already formulating how to repurpose some parts of the campaign to reverse the TPK without removing its impact. I didn't need to do it, but in the fight at one point in time, there were 3 people down making death saves. Our Ratatosk is awesome because his whole concept is that his bard is going to be a shape-changing specialist. So we've already seen him as a Tyrannosaurus in a fight, and this time he was a giant crab. So there was a giant crab fighting devil sharks. It was great.
Oh, and Kazina did get to save the dwarf sailor lady. which I was determined I was going to do.
I was keeping track of how many rounds it was taking to know whether or not she had gotten out of revivify range. And Kazina cut open the shark and got the dead dwarf out with 2 rounds to spare. They unceremoniously rolled her body into the hold so that the NPC cleric could revivify her. But it was a win, gosh darn it.
Towards the end of the fight, when, Ivy's down, everyone's really tapped out. Kazina is unconscious in front of, the last devil shark, which threw itself up on the ship and very close to being swallowed.
Yes.
And I was not convinced that the rest of the party would be as determined to retrieve Kazina as Kazina was to retrieve the dwarf lady.
Yeah, there were a lot of near misses in that fight. I liked it, but I was sweating it as a DM that doesn't necessarily want to have yet another TPK in his column. I say yet another. I haven't had one since Pathfinder, I don't think.
It's really hard to kill all the PCs in 5th edition unless you're, I don't want to say doing something wrong, but it's really hard to kill the PCs.
It's interesting, the dynamic of people dying. I was just hearing some statistics about, like, in a lot of cases, you're more likely to die because of things affecting you rather than just from being knocked out by things doing hit point damage to you. So
yeah. So
the team finally made landfall. They're getting ready to start their overland travel to meet up with their mysterious contact. Before that happened, they are in a city that is really ramping up for war. So there's a bunch of warships, and there are the people wandering the streets doing the press gang to get people on their crew. So I had the group make a group intimidate check just to see if they looked too tough for the press gangs to mess with. And what is hilarious is our fighter and our rogue did not make their checks. Our bard, who is a Ratatosk, which is normally a squirrel person, but he is currently cursed to be a possum person, and our sorcerer both made their intimidate checks. So no one messed with them.
It makes sense mechanically. They have charisma, we don't.
Yes.
But when you look at it, the 2 most deadly characters are just like, la, 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 la.
And then, for our Tales of the Valiant game, we finished up the Banner of the Bull adventure, and it brought everyone up to 3rd level. We decided we want to continue on with this, so we are still going to continue trying to find a monthly way to keep going with this. There are several more adventures in the right level range for the setting, so I know which one we'll be doing next. Everyone picked their subclasses, so we have an Oath of Devotion Paladin, a Dwarf Rogue Thief, a Dark Elf Warlock with the Reaper Patron, and a Wood Elf Druid who is of the Circle of the Volva. Allow me to point out, that is a Norse term for, like, a Fate Witch Priestess. And there are umlauts involved.
More like vulva than what your dirty minds are thinking.
Welcome to the Dungeon Master's Workshop.
So, back at the dawn of RPGs, you rolled the dice, and you rolled with what you rolled. Various classes have always had resources to spend, but those are all representative of what the player character can do in the setting. Eventually, games started to introduce ways to tweak and bend the narrative so that a giant rat doesn't randomly bite your 5th level character and give them a fever and kill them. Today, we're going to look at the metacurrencies that have been introduced into the 5e open game license games, and also just a general conversation on what metacurrencies are. So let's start there. What is a metacurrency?
So, as you kind of alluded to in that opening, a lot of classes get things like spell slots are basically a currency. They are a thing that you can spend in order to enable a class feature. Metacurrencies are something that you spend to either roll a die again, to introduce a narrative element, to say I had an item that I didn't have previously. The reason they are referred to as metacurrencies is it is not that your character is bending reality to make this true. It's that it is essentially saying, from the storytelling standpoint, this is not what we wanted to have happen. I am going to spend this resource to see if we can change how the randomness of the dice have kind of brought us to this point.
I think in general, these are more common in other game systems. I'm most familiar with them in Savage Worlds with the Benny, in Mutants and Masterminds with Hero Points, in Fate with the Fate Points, and I can't remember what they're called in Cortex, but there's also those points in Cortex. And the idea is that more often than not, it lets you do a reroll, but it can also let you do other things in those games. In Savage Worlds, for example, the Benny is required. If you take wounds, you can spend a Benny to try and soak those wounds by making a vigor roll. In Fate, you can use them to trigger your aspects so that you can add bonuses to your rolls and stuff like that. These are very common in a lot of other game systems.
Yeah, and it's become more common because, D&D cross-pollinates with other RPGs.
Mm-hmm.
It started and then other things were created and then it brought things back, kind of like how video games work with RPGs.
Yeah.
That is basically the crux of it. This is very common in a lot of more story-based games, but we are seeing more and more of it in D&D.
If you ever wander through a convention in the RPG spaces and you see people with piles of poker chips in front of them, that's a game that has a metacurrency.
Indeed.
One interesting game that I always enjoyed was the Doctor Who Adventures in Time and Space game. Because in that one, I can't remember what they call the metacurrency, but it's basically chips, points like that.
Mm-hmm.
The interesting thing there is the more powerful the character is, the fewer of those points they have.
Mm-hmm.
This way, the more mundane, normal characters have more of those points to spend to do spectacular things. It's how this game was obviously designed around the early, the 9 and 10 eras of Doctor Who. And so it's how a simple shop girl like Rose can actually defeat a big bad alien as she helps the Doctor do things. It's designed to basically kind of even that playing field, which I always thought was a fascinating way to use those metacurrencies.
Oh, and I did think one other thing is Good Society, which is the the Regency era RPG. That is almost all metacurrency. It is all you spending things to say, I'm going to introduce this into the narrative, or I want this to be important going forward.
Mm-hmm.
You have a certain procedure that you go through, and then when you have all the things that come out of that procedure, you say, this is the important one, and you spend the currency on it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an interesting case where it's all metacurrency in that.
Just looking at my shelves, I can see a lot of games that have a metacurrency in them. Even the Star Trek game.
Oh yeah,
has the metacurrency that you accumulate as a group and then can choose to spend.
You have momentum, you have threat. You also have determination, which is sort of, it's supposed to be you pulling from your reserves, but it is not literally that you have 3 times a day you have resolve. It is you basically saying that it matters at this point in the story.
Yeah. What metacurrencies are present in the 2014 Dungeons & Dragons 5e books?
We only have a few things. Inspiration is a metacurrency. It is weird because inspiration is on or off. Like, a character either has inspiration or they don't. So it's hard to think of it as a currency because it doesn't accumulate, but it really is, because it's something that you can spend to change the narrative. In this case, by strict interpretations, deciding that you're going to have advantage on something.
Nobody runs it rules as written. Let's just be upfront here. Nobody. I know there are people who do. Most people don't run inspiration rules as written. Most people treat it as a reroll. And
a lot of the rules that have evolved since then have pretty much said, yeah, we're not fighting that anymore. If you look in the 2024 rules.
Nothing sucks. I say nothing sucks more, but it really sucks as a player if you spend that inspiration to, basically do the advantage roll and you get like an 18 and a 19.
Mm-hmm.
It was a waste of an inspiration. You were going to hit no matter what. It's much more satisfying as a player to basically, okay, I missed. I know I missed. Let me spend inspiration because I really, really want to hit this guy.
This is going to get slightly ahead. I'll revisit this later, but the Beowulf game, which is a 5e game, has an interesting thing where your inspiration is your fate, and you keep track of which die you're rolling normally and which one you're rolling because you spent your inspiration on it. And if you take the regular die instead of the other one, you keep your
interesting.
You keep your weird is what it's called in that. So that was kind of an interesting twist on that. The other thing though that's interesting is there is a metacurrency that I have seen a ton in 5th edition from a feat, because it is the feat that so many people are tempted to take, and that is the luck feat.
Yep.
So basically, that's giving you 3 points to spend to let you reroll things.
Single feat. Anyone can take it. It's...
What do we know about your character because of this? They're lucky. Yeah, it is funny how that... I've seen that in almost every game. You know, someone has lucky. And, you know, I'm not going to begrudge them that. I just think it's funny because it tells you something about how good the feat is compared to other feats with how often it shows up. And, you know, I mentioned this before, but in 2024, they did change it to where you can just use it as a reroll instead of as granting you advantage.
Don't fight the community, man.
No. But also they'll let you just use it to reroll anything. So if you want to reroll your D12 that you rolled on your Great Axe damage because you rolled a 1, you can spend your inspiration to do that too, which I kind of like because I've known people that are very stingy about not wanting to reroll their D20 rolls, but they will get very upset if that giant clutch hit that they made with that Great Axe rolls a 1.
It sucks. So what about, are there any optional rules for metacurrencies in 2014 edition?
The 2014 DMG had so many optional rules in it, and nobody knows that because nobody reads it. But
well, to be fair, even if you did read it, it's organized really poorly, so it's kind of hard to, you know, it's not the type of book most people are going to sit down and read cover to cover, and therefore trying to find the things that are relevant to what you want, not always the easiest.
I have read it cover to cover, and I still will stop and think, what section was this in? Because sometimes it just does not make logical sense what section it ended up in.
I just go to Jared and go, hey, Jared, what about this?
It'd be really nice if there were a website that hosted the content that you could use a search function on, and that search function wasn't terrible for looking up anything other than very obvious keywords. However, speaking of those optional rules from the 2014 DMG, you have hero points, which is pretty much a holdover from how Eberron used them in 3rd edition. You have a certain number of hero points that you can spend. They refresh when you get a level. When you spend them, you add an extra die to your D20 roll, which starts out at a D4 and it goes all the way up to like a D12 by the time you're in, you know, tier 4.
I have to confess, even when I was running 3.5 sorta Eberron, I always forgot about the hero points. My players always forgot about the hero points. It was an interesting concept, but in execution, it's another one of those systems that you really, really need the physical representation of the currency in front of you, like that token.
Or literally dice.
Because it was tied to your level and not the session, it's just easy to forget that you have it.
Yeah. I mean, the nice thing is you aren't limited. Like, you can regain, you know, any number of them in between, you know, when you level up. So it's nice because you can reward them even in circumstances when you couldn't award inspiration. But yeah, my players, we tried this in 5th edition and they didn't like it. It just didn't feel as strange as it is with inspiration kind of being on or off and people being weird about when they want to use it. They still like that better than tracking the hero points. And then the other wild thing from the 2014 rules, because the 2014 DMG really tried to tap into some other narrative game zeitgeist in some of its designs and didn't always do the best job of implementing them. But plot points are also another thing that are in the 2014 DMG. And they give multiple ways of using these, but all of them are a variation on you spend the plot point and you explain how the scene has changed.
I actually, that's what they're called in the Cortex system, is plot points. That's kind of how they work in a lot of other games, but they also work as the reroll.
I think it's weird because plot points in D&D, because there is so much in D&D that is absolute, like these stats are true for this thing. It's not like in a PBTA game where I don't have stats for the dragon. I just know that you need to roll a whatever in order to successfully kill it. In D&D, it is a little bit weirder to say, oh, the rocks fell down and hit the dragon in the head and killed it. You can do that. As a DM, you can say, I don't think that makes a good story, but then you start negotiating the story.
I'll be honest, I don't hate inspiration. I think inspiration was a nice step forward for the 2014 D&D, but I don't like that it's an on or off thing.
Yeah.
So in my campaigns, everyone gets 2. Everyone gets 2 every session, just because they're more likely to use it. They're not going to hoard it. They're going to keep doing it. And it's actually, let's take a moment and talk about the fact that you as the GM are supposed to reward your players with inspiration when they do things that are relevant to their character.
Yes. And that is another point where I liked hero points better, because hero points are just, you do something heroic, you get another point. Inspiration, by rules as written, it's supposed to be one of those things that came with their backgrounds that talks about how their character works. And you have to remember that and award it.
Yeah. And,
when those come up.
And the issue with that is this requires that the GM have those aspects of each of the PCs at their table memorized. And that's not going to happen.
No.
That's not going to happen. And it's hard. And I even run into this when I'm running Savage Worlds, where the bennies are supposed to flow freely.
Mm-hmm.
There are a couple of mechanically forced points where you give the players more bennies, like if a Joker comes up during drawing initiative cards, or when you change scenes, you're supposed to give them new bennies, but you're also supposed to give people bennies for being awesome.
Yeah.
Give someone a Benny for saying something really quippy and great. Give somebody a Benny for doing a really cool maneuver. Give somebody a Benny for having a really great idea. And it's really hard to remember to do that when you're the GM and you're running the game, because you have so many other things. You're spinning all these plates in the air, and it's hard to remember that as good as you should. And inspiration is kind of the same way, in that we will often forget to reward inspiration to players during the course of the game when they don't already have it.
Yeah. And sometimes when somebody does something really cool that you want to award them with it, they already have it. If you're doing it rules as written.
Yeah. So it's a really frustrating issue, because I don't want the players to be like, hey, Ange, I just did this thing, which is part of my character's background, so I should get an inspiration point, right? Right? I don't want my players doing that. I don't want them to have to remind me of who their character is and what their character did. But it was still a step in the right direction, I think.
Yeah, and this is getting a little off of the metacurrency thing, but the other problem is a lot of the traits and bonds and flaws that are in the backgrounds, especially the original ones in 2014, they're not action-oriented. They're not, because you believe this, you will always do this. And then it's a yes or no. Did you do that in a situation where it came up? Instead, it was vague stuff like, you generally like cheese in some circumstances. So then you're sitting here going, was there cheese on that sandwich you had?
Cheese in all circumstances.
Yeah, they weren't easily yes/no questions for a lot of those traits, which makes it a lot easier to at least realize when you're supposed to be awarding those.
Yeah. Like I said, it was a step in the right direction. It is a 11-year-old 11-year-old system at this point. But it has its issues. Let's move on, though. What are some other metacurrencies in 5e related games?
All right. Well, a few of these are interesting in that they are pretty much inspiration, but solving for some of the issues we were just talking about. So in Pugmire, you have fortune, and fortune is something the group has. And you start with 2, and then when something important to your character comes up, which is a little bit better defined for some of the Pugmire characters and their backgrounds, you get to add something else to the fortune bowl, and then you can spend those in the same way that you would inspiration. And yes, when I was running Pugmire, we got the little candy bones to put in the fortune bowl to represent the fortune. So
that's awesome.
But, in that case, it does turn it into a true currency. It is not just on or off. And you start a session with 2.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that was interesting is in the Lord of the Rings role-playing game, you had Fellowship. And what Fellowship is it is the idea you can have up to 1 for each character in the party. And certain patrons, if they are, the patron of your group, might grant you an extra one because they're more inspirational. And you start off with all of those filled, and you spend them during the adventure, and then there's like certain circumstances that are usually a little bit more extraordinary where you would get a point of fellowship back. But again, it's a currency. You have, like, if you have 6 people in the party, you have 6. And then if you have Gandalf as your patron, you might have 7, something like that. So you have those 7 to spend on this adventure. And then when momentous things happen during the adventure, you might get to add some more back in there. The Arcana of the Ancients was the Monte Cook Games translation of Numenera to 5e, and that basically introduced using the GM intrusion from the Cypher games. So basically what that is doing is whenever the GM says, hey, I want to do something that is not already happening in this scene, I'm going to change the scene this way, have inspiration and pick one other person to also get inspiration. So in that way, it is sort of like a reverse currency because the GM decides they want to do something and then they have to pay out to you in order to enable it.
I actually really like GM intrusions in kind of that way. I'll actually save this and talk about it a little later.
Yeah.
Because we'll cover some things we like about stuff.
You also have the Resolve pool and the Beast pool, which are both from the Grim Hollows Player's Guide. These are die rating, so like it's a d6 that you have in there, and you might have a certain number of d6. You can spend them to do, like boost certain rolls, but also both of these pools, like if the pool is full and you spend all of them, you can do like a major thing. So like if the GM in the Beast pool, which is like the ominous bad things are building up, if you get, one of those for each of the PCs in the group and you spend all of them at one time, the Beast, which is kind of like this legendary horror thing, shows up in the region that the PCs are in. Doesn't mean they're going to necessarily fight it, but the Beast causes horrible things to happen. Like, this is when plagues start and, wars start out and ancient things reawaken. So that is like your key to say, okay, a major thing is about to happen in the campaign because I am going to spend all of these dice now. So I'm just warning you ahead of time. Things are going to get real after this. More recently, you have Luck from Tales of the Valiant, which basically every time you miss an attack or a save on your turn, well, the first time you miss an attack or a save on your turn, you get a point of luck. You can spend luck 1 for 1 to add to your roll, or you can spend 3 luck at one time to get a reroll.
I like luck because it is player facing.
It is actually my favorite one on this entire list.
I didn't think I was going to like it when we first started interacting with it, but the fact that the player can keep track of it is really helpful. And the GM can still do things like, hey, that was awesome, take a point of luck.
Yeah, you still can award luck, but the nice thing is, if you forget to, it's not that luck is going to bottom out and nobody's going to get it. As long as people roll badly, they're going to get some more luck again. Yeah,
I've gotten to the point where I will remind players that they can do it, because like when they fail a roll, I'm like, oh, you miss, take a point of luck, and give them that reminder to keep track of it. It also reminds them to spend it as they're accruing it, because luck does have a you can have a maximum of 5 luck, and the moment you get 6 luck, you have to kind of reset your luck.
You roll a d4 to see how many luck you retain. So if you hit 6 and you had all 5 of those things built up and you could have done something with them, you may only have 1 after that because you weren't spending your luck.
If you fail a roll and you're going to gain a 6th luck, just spend 3 and re-roll, my dude.
Yes, absolutely. I've talked to a lot of people that really like luck, and we're actually using that in our game, which is the Heroes of Havel's Way, which is largely a 5e game, but we did import luck from Tales of the Valiant into it because it's nice. I like it.
Heroes of Havel's Way is Chris interprets D&D. So it's got a lot of Chris built into the way we are playing it. But like Jared said, one of the things we've pulled is luck into the game.
And then another one from Tales of the Valiant is Doom, which is GM facing. That is an optional rule, but it gives you a certain number of Doom points to spend based on the CR of the encounter. You are not supposed to use this for every encounter. When people run into like a CR2 thing and they're a 5th level party, you don't give that hapless group of giant rats Doom. That's not what it's for. It is supposed to be for major encounters.
It wasn't mechanically what I did for the Hollow Man encounter, but if I had been thinking about the Doom rules, I probably could have justified what I was doing.
Oh yeah,
with that, because like I'm like, I don't. This guy's not going to go down just because they're plunking fire arrows at it. My man, come on.
Mm-hmm.
They need to drive him into the bonfire. That's the whole point of this.
Exactly, and that Doom is a really good way of doing that, and we'll get into something about GMs having a currency in a little bit that I know you want to kind of talk about too. Doom has some standard uses that are in the Monster Vault, but then the GM's Guide has some more examples of how you can use it because it's meant to be kind of flexible. It is kind of that thing where it's like, okay, I want to change the encounter, but I don't want to feel arbitrary. So I'm going to spend this for this and let the players know I am spending this to do this. One of the standard things is just your rerolls. Like if you want your monster to reroll a save or an attack, you can spend Doom and have them do that. But another thing you can do is if they have a recharge ability or a X number per day and they're out, you can spend Doom once in that encounter to get one of those back.
Or you can just be Jared and keep having the damn devil sharks recharge their breaths thing.
I have been ridiculously good at rolling recharge rolls in this campaign.
It's a good thing Ivy wasn't standing closer to the side of the ship.
Yes, this is true. But yeah, I really like Doom too. I was actually thinking of switching it around a little and using it per session instead of just in big boss fights.
Mm-hmm.
So that, you know, this is how much I have for the whole session. Because sometimes you don't want to use it for just the random giant rats that you run into, but you may want like the bodyguard that attacks you before the big bad catches up with you to survive a little bit longer.
Yeah.
But you also still want to have a limit to that.
Yeah. So these sound complicated. Why would we want to add metacurrencies to our games?
Part of it is just having that feel that as much as we love the dice and as much as it is fun to adapt our stories to what the dice are telling us are true, there are times when it just does not feel right that the dice told us how the story is going to go a certain way.
Yeah.
And actually the metacurrencies help you to, instead of saying we're going to ignore the dice and kind of undercutting the fact that you do use dice for this, it is saying, no, you can change that this many times, and that's it.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, is like, we like the dice, we like the randomness the dice provides, but when the game is purely living and dying, and I do mean dying, based on the dice rolls, it's not always that much fun.
Yeah.
As a player, you come up with a really, really cool idea, and you know that monster you're fighting only has a few hit points left, and you roll a 2.
Yeah.
Come on, let me just spend my inspiration, reroll, and see if we can take this thing down. It helps the players feel awesome about what their characters are doing. Most of the time. Sometimes you spend inspiration and, you rolled a 2 and then you roll a 3.
How many times have you seen the player character that would most want to kill the villain that they're fighting miss, and then the next PC who doesn't care one way or the other whether they kill this person just strolls up to him and offs him?
Yep.
And that's one of those things where if that person that had a vested interest in being, and the one who in an action movie would be the one that killed him.
Yeah. This is one of those things that in the philosophy of RPGs as a whole, it has come to be better understood in quote unquote modern times that this is a shared narrative between everyone at the table, the GM and the players included. We still like our storytelling tropes. So we want to have those moments where the characters get to do the cool thing that is relevant to their characters. So having some sort of metacurrency in the game allows for those opportunities for the player to be like, this is really important to me.
Mm-hmm.
I really, really want to succeed at this.
And I think the other thing that's kind of interesting about that is RPGs in general, I don't think it's too much of a stretch. I'm sure somebody could argue with me online, but...
Argue? Online? On the internet?
I know, it's so strange. It's so strange. But I think you could say RPGs are storytelling games. That's what they do.
Mm-hmm.
D&D especially is very interested in being a game as well as telling a story. Metacurrencies help you to be able to bend the narrative while and still making it feel like a game.
Yeah.
Because you have a limited number of this currency, you get it at certain times, so it's still part of the game side of things, but it is helping you change that narrative side of things that may not have worked the way you wanted it to.
There is a vast spectrum of role-playing games out there, where some of the smaller indie story games are literally just people sitting around a table telling a story with very little randomness involved. It's just, we are putting this story together. And then there's the other end of the spectrum where you have a very crunchy game where it's supposed to be a game that you can kind of get a story out of.
Mm-hmm.
I like my games kind of in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I like there to be a game aspect to it, but I'm also here for the story.
Yeah.
So I like things that let me manipulate the story and be like, I have a really good idea for the way this could go. Let's see if we can make this happen.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it's that shared narrative between everyone at the table. I have these weird, like, not weird, but I have these influences from indie games and influences from traditional games. And like, I just mash them all together in this really cool stew.
Definitely.
Let's talk about which metacurrencies work for different types of games.
I think hero points are good if you want your characters to be consistently a little bit more competent. Because as long as they have hero points, they can count on getting at least one extra point every time they spend one. And depending on which die type they have, you know, on average, if you're rolling a D4, D4 and half is 2.5, so it rounds up to 3. So that is how much more competent they will be when they spend those hero points. Now, depending on how often you give them to them, you know, it may not alter things quite as much, but I do think hero points are good for that whole, like, no, you are really competent people. I would say you should avoid something like plot points if you are running a published adventure.
I can't imagine why you say that, Jared.
Because I have a hard enough time remembering, wait, if they don't talk to this NPC, are they going to come back 2 chapters later and be really important? And if on top of that, you're having the players go, hey, I just found out the king's my cousin because I spent this plot point. And then you realize later on that, you know, the king is actually a lich that died 500 years ago. And you're like,
Yeah. I mean, we've talked about published adventures before, and there's some good and there's some bad.
Yeah.
It makes your life easier and harder at the exact same time.
Yeah, I would say plot points are better for 1, a game where you're going to be a little bit more improvisational, and 2, maybe not terrible in like a sandbox type thing where there's not like a storyline happening, so it's not as bad if the PC, you know, if one of the players decides, no, I want a very different thing to happen at this point.
Yeah.
I like the beast pool in Grim Hollow. I have not played with it. I don't like some of the uses that they give you for the individual dice. I don't like nerfing a player's roll. I would much rather buff the monster than nerf a player.
Yeah.
That feels different to me. But I like the idea that you have this pool that is building up as things get more tense, where stakes are getting higher.
It's one thing if an NPC casts silvery barbs on a PC. It's another if the GM says, no, I'm not going to let you have that nat 20.
Yeah.
That's a whole different dynamic there.
Yeah, there's a whole other thing where it's like, there is a difference between saying, no, I don't want you to hit me right now, and saying, no, I'm not going to let you get this crit right now. So yeah, I would say something like the Beast Pool. It's the same thing like in the Cortex games, like in Marvel Heroic, where you had the Doom Pool.
Mm-hmm.
I like that the fact that it is building up and you can show the players like mechanically there is nothing right now that is about to attack you, but look at all of these dice in this pool right now.
The impending tension of the threat.
And I think Doom is really good if you do want to have those boss battles that have enough flexibility to where you can say like, man, this dragon needs to breathe fire one more time.
Yeah.
Like, I can't let it go down now. It's got to be able to do something else here.
Have we done boss battles? Maybe we should do boss battles.
We probably should.
Because they are a whole other topic in and of themselves. What are some other things you would want Metacurrencies to do in your games?
One of the things that I kind of like that has been introduced in some of the later 2014, like pre-2024 rules, like things like in Tasha's, are that some of the classes have gotten the ability to spend spell slots to recharge a class ability that they only get a certain number of times per day. I would like to be able to use Metacurrencies to do that same thing for player characters. You can spend 3 luck and you get back one of your uses of this thing that you have like 3 times per short rest. And you want to use it one more time, okay, spend a 3 luck and now you get another use back. I kind of like that flexibility because I did like those things that came out like in Tasha's and places like that where it was like, I'm going to spend a 6th level spell slot so that I have this ability back because that's more useful to me than that spell slot right now.
Yeah, I think that's a really useful way to do it. I honestly want there to be more. Like I said, in my game, my Eberron game, I gave them 2 inspiration. 2 inspiration a setting to start with as minimum because 1 just isn't enough. And I wouldn't mind there being more. I haven't ever reached a point where I've felt strong enough about this to fiddle with the system. In fact, one of the other things I'm going to mention here is something I feel strongly about, but haven't really bothered doing. In Mutants and Masterminds, when you spend a hero point to re-roll, you cannot get below an 11 on the die. Basically, if you roll 10 or less, you add 10 to the roll. So if you roll an 8, you have actually rolled an 18.
Yeah.
Because I mean, Mutants and Masterminds is a superhero game. The idea is that you are being big and bold superheroes. And it's kind of how I like my D&D games. And there is an argument to be made about D&D characters being superheroes. And I have thought quite a bit about just saying that if you roll 10 or less, you add 10 to it. You know, it doesn't mean if you roll a 10 and you add 10, you get a 20 and it's a net 20. No, that's not how this works.
Yeah, it's just numerically a 20. It's not a natural 20.
It's one of those things where, like, I kind of like that. And I do have friends that do that. I just haven't quite been in a position to basically say, yes, this is what we're doing.
The other thing that is nice about that in Mutants and Masterminds is that if you roll below an 11, you don't feel like you have wasted spending it. Even if you're not successful, it doesn't feel like you wasted it.
It still feels bad if you roll a 1 on it.
Yes.
Or you roll an 11 on it. Because, like, oh, man.
Yes.
Okay, fine.
But it is different than, you know, that feeling of, hey, I got a 5. I need to re-roll this. Oh, I got a 2 on the second one. So I guess that didn't do me any good. Yeah, but I mean, that's been a thing that I've heard a lot of people say, even if the original way that inspiration worked, where you just had to decide whether you wanted advantage or not, but you could pick after you rolled the die. If you know that you rolled an 11 or higher, statistically, you probably don't want to spend it then. So it is actually another mental trigger to tell you, don't sit on this, use it now because you've rolled a 10 or lower. Yeah.
Another thing I wouldn't mind being in D&D Metacurrencies is the GM intrusion. And the way I think of this is something I've seen GMs do in Mutants and Masterminds and something I've done myself in Savage Worlds. And that's like, I'm going to do a thing. I'm going to GM Fiat a little moment here. And I'm going to give each of the players a metacurrency for their character to say, just let the scene play for the moment.
Yeah.
Because, as you know, you can't monologue because the players are just going to shoot your bad guy in the face. And if you don't do this sometimes, they will fight moving the scene forward in a way, like, so for example, again, hey, it's Ange and Jared. We're going to talk about superheroes. In a Justice League game, the GM wanted to separate the group by having some of them get blasted into the future, some alternative twisted future, and the other 3 stuck back in the present, having to deal with their timeline falling apart.
Mm-hmm.
He basically did this via a GM intrusion. He's basically like, I'm going to give you a hero point, let this happen. Wonder Woman, who I was playing, Superman and the Flash, got sent to the future that had been twisted and corrupted by something bad happening in the present, and various things were happening. So everyone had to deal with this, but it was something that allowed that cool narrative split to happen without the players just digging in and not letting something bad happen. Because that's a thing. As players, we don't want bad things to happen to our characters, and we will fight tooth and nail. But sometimes those bad things are really cool for the story.
Yes, and that is an interesting thing, because in the moment, there are times that we think we want something to happen a certain way. And in the long term, when it happened the way you said you wanted it to happen, it does not feel as satisfying.
Mm-hmm.
I will give you an example from when I was a tiny child. When I was watching Return of the Jedi, I was sure that Luke was going to kill Darth Vader. And as an adult, I absolutely love everything about that. Every word, like, I tear up when I hear, Vader, Anakin giving Luke his final words. You don't get that if you just say, well, he's the bad guy and Luke's the hero, so he's going to kill him.
Yep.
So yeah, there are times when what you think you want is not actually what you want, if you have a chance to think about it. One of the things that I would love, and this is also a thing that reminds me of like Mutants and Masterminds, because this is a function of that, I would like, for example, if I spend Doom to allow a villain to get away, we're not going to mechanically say, well, I can fly at 240 feet and he can only, run at 308 or 180. So therefore, there is no way he can get away from me. We are going to hunt him down and keep fighting him until he's dead. I would like to be able to spend Doom and say, look, everybody, I had this much resource. I am going to spend it now so that I get to say this guy survives until another adventure comes up.
A lot of these things are, you do not want to use them in a way that abuses the trust of your players.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to do a GM intrusion to just ruin your player's day. You don't want to use the beast pool to take a nat 20 away from one of your players. You don't want to screw with your players. You don't want to always have the bad guy get away. The players can never take them out. It's like you need to let your players have those satisfying moments of triumph and awesomeness.
Mm-hmm.
But as a GM, there's a lot of times where you knew there was more meat to the story that could happen with this character or this situation, and you just need to give it just a little more oomph. Like me giving the Hollow Man some regen that wasn't actually listed on his character sheet.
Oh, yeah. What's interesting about that, too, is I would be fine, just like it says on the Doom, for the Doom points, if you can only recharge an ability once per encounter, so you're not just spending Doom to do that over and over again. I would be fine if it says you can do this to let them escape once.
Yeah.
I have a little bit more breathing room to make this character more impactful because he's getting away now.
Yeah. Again, don't do these things to abuse your players' trust. Do these things to make the story cool.
I do think, though, we started kind of touching on this earlier when you were talking about this. I do think that is something I like about GM currencies, though, because it is a way of showing the players, I am only going to push things this far.
Mm-hmm.
We know as DMs in D&D, we could always say, oh no, you've almost killed the red dragon, but now its mate shows up. You can do that, but there is a certain... It's more fulfilling if things go the way you originally kind of planned them and you don't push them too hard, but you have a means of doing it that you can say, I am going to push it this far and no further, and I am now out of things to push it with.
There are also times just let your players have the win.
Yeah.
I always bring up the Clay Golem. It was my first Eberron campaign. They had gone to Zilargo, to the Library of Kornberg, to get some information, and the head of the library was too busy to deal with their adventurer shenanigans, and then finally said, fine, if you want information, go deal with my problem in the basement. His problem in the basement was a clay golem that had gotten loose and killed a researcher. my players are like, do we need to go do it right now? Is there anyone else in danger? He's like, no, it's locked in the laboratory. It's like, okay, give us a half an hour. They did research. They figured out what clay golems were vulnerable to. They outfitted themselves with some adamantine. The gunslinger already had some adamantine bullets that he'd bought at the beginning of the campaign because he thought they did something differently than they did. They go down there. They open the door. The monk goes and hits it. The cavalier goes and hits it. And then the gunslinger went and critted and one-shotted the clay golem. You know, for a moment, I considered having a second clay golem be behind the big, tall bookcase and, like, keep the fight going. But the exultation and excitement on the faces of my players was enough to be like, nope, they got this one.
Mm-hmm.
They one-shotted a clay golem.
I'll share my golem story from my worst campaign I ever played in, too. We were playing 3-5 ostensibly, and we ran into an iron golem, and the DM literally looked at the stats that night and said, oh, now it's hit with anything magical or adamantine. I don't like that. I'm going to say that it still gets full damage resistance unless you have a +3 weapon.
Don't do that.
Don't do that. But also, I am going to enjoy being petty because we went in there. The iron golem didn't fit through anything, so we had to get through that room, but it couldn't do anything else. So we destroyed the floor and dropped it to another level. I don't care if it still has all of its hit points. It is not a problem anymore.
Okay, I think we've covered enough. Let's get out of here.
Now let's join Ange and Jared for some downtime research, where they do the work so we don't have to.
Every episode, we're going to look for something related to D&D that we want to pass along to listeners. It might be products, websites, videos, or podcasts, but it will always be something that we think will enhance your D&D experience. Before we do that, however, we are going to do our Eldritch Invocation. We have a Patreon now, so if you would like to help us do the show and provide some additional content for you, we would love it if you decided to join. We've got our own Discord, and there are all kind of goodies like consolidated episodes of Heroes of Havel's Way for you to listen to all at once, pages from our alternate spellbook, modular layer actions, new monster stat blocks, background material for our actual play campaign, and you can find all of that at patreon.com/THAC0WA.
So for me, Hank Green is awesome. I have been following him and his brother John Green on Vlogbrothers for literal years. I don't think it's decades at this point, but it's getting damn close. I've adored their other shows on YouTube as well, and Hank recently dropped a SciShow episode entitled Your D&D Party is Too Big, and it's awesome. He basically runs down the statistics on finding a time for your group to actually get together, and how the more people are in your group, the more impossible that is. It's a whole lot of math, but it is all D&D related, and it's awesome. I immediately shared this with my fellow cat herders in my gaming circles, because if you know, you know. There'll be a link in the show notes.
I literally watched that video right before, because you talked about it, and I hadn't watched it yet, and I watched it right before we started recording, and that was great.
I especially love the moment where he's like, I'm not the GM, Brennan is the GM.
Yeah, I saw that. Then if you're ever lucky enough to actually play RPGs for a living. Oh, goodness. I'm going to throw this out here now. Friend of the show, Branda Stoddard, is actually one of the designers that has been doing material for the next Dimension 20 game.
Ooh.
The one where they have a crew of all professional wrestlers playing.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. So congratulations to Brandon. He is part of a team that Hannah Rose is heading up. He's already been one of the people working on the Worlds Beyond Number, the Witch class and the Wizard subclass that they put out. So I just wanted to say, congratulations to him, because that's pretty neat.
I may have to point my brother to watch that, because he loves his pro wrestling.
Yeah, I mean, I can't remember everybody that's in it, but Xavier Woods is one of them, and I love him. He is great. I was just going to do what I was going to do last time. It's a cheap plug, but it's a plug. There's lots of fantasy animation on Netflix right now. Netflix screws up so much stuff, but for some reason it seems like they will greenlight multiple seasons of animated shows before they will live action shows. So you should reward them for doing at least one thing right. This was already like at the end of last year, but Arcane Season 2 is out. That is a great show. And on top of that, I think it's a great inspiration for like Eberron type games where you have like the kind of, steampunkish sort of semi-technology magical things going on. And it's just a gorgeous show anyway. Like it just looks amazing too. Dragon Prince Season 7 is out. I love Dragon Prince. It is a great fantasy show. It is as much, even though it has its own RPG and that RPG is fun and I've run it before, it is also a really neat inspiration for D&D things.
Mm-hmm.
And this one I cannot vouch for yet, but it is there. It is The Witcher Sirens of the Deep animated movie that is on there at this point in time. So you may want to check that out. I did not like the live action prequel that they did for The Witcher, and The Witcher seasons have gotten a little more questionable as time have rolled on. But the first animated show that they did for The Witcher, I did really like. So maybe the animated Witcher is still going to work for you. Or maybe you like The Witcher and don't worry about my opinion. It doesn't matter. Also, Honor Among Thieves is on Netflix now. Go watch it again because it's good. And we want to tell Hasbro that they should be doing a sequel to it.
I want a sequel. Anyway, we are happily part of the Polygamers Podcast Network, helping you run and play your best games. We think you'll enjoy another Polygamers podcast like
Pandas Talking Games, queer gamers talking about tabletop role-playing games and making outtakes. Join Pandas Phil and Senda every other Wednesday, answering listener questions about playing, running, and designing TTRPGs. It's like Car Talk, but for your games.
We've used up all of our resources, so I think it's time for a long rest. I hope this adventure was rewarding for you, and we hope you go exploring with us when we start our next one.